The weight on the chest was suffocating, pressing harder with each second. Eyes snapped, open to the sight of the stray, no longer small or harmless. Its body stretched unnaturally long, limbs twisting at impossible angles, and its face splitting apart to reveal rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. A deep, guttural growl filled the room, vibrating through the air like a warning. Panic set in, but no amount of shoving could move the creature. Its amber eyes glowed brighter, fixed with an unnatural intensity, and the walls began to pulse and crack, black veins spreading, outward like a living thing. The thing tilted its head, far beyond what should be possible, and in a voice that wasn't a voice, it whispered, "Don't run." "I'm not done yet." The cat was quiet on the walk home, its amber eyes locked on something just past the edge of the darkened streetlights. The air felt heavier with every step, but the thought was dismissed as exhaustion. At the apartment door, the cat darted in before the door was fully open, its sleek body moving unnaturally fast. A dish of leftover chicken was set on the kitchen floor. The cat sniffed it once but didn't eat. Instead, it sat in the middle of the room, its unblinking gaze fixed on its new owner. The light above flickered, and the sound of its purring filled the silence. But the noise was wrong. It wasn't soothing, it was sharp and static-like, growing louder until it seemed to vibrate in the walls. "Maybe you're just nervous," came the half-hearted mutter. But even as the words were spoken, the cat didn't move, didn't blink. It just stared. That night, sleep came slowly. Shadows seemed longer, darker. The purring could still be heard faintly, even though the cat had been left in the living room. Dreams twisted into nightmares, shadowy figures with amber eyes stood motionless, whispering, "It's not a cat," over and over, louder each time. The words turned into a chant, and suddenly the figures surged forward, surrounding the bed. Gasping, awake but paralyzed, a crushing weight on the chest made it hard to breathe. The room was still dark, but glowing amber orbs hovered just inches away. Slowly, vision cleared. It was the cat, sitting on the chest like a predator claiming its prey. The distorted purr returned, vibrating louder and louder until it became a low, growling voice that only whispered one word: "Mine." The cat wasn't small anymore. At first, it was subtle, just a little larger than it had been the day before. But now, only a few days later, it was undeniable. Its sleek frame had stretched unnaturally, its legs too long, its shoulders too angular. Each time the thought came, it was pushed away with a whispered excuse: "Maybe it's just eating well," but the truth clawed at the edges of the mind, impossible to silence. The cat's behavior wasn't helping. Its purring had grown louder, almost rhythmic, like a low, hypnotic hum. It would sit in the middle of the room, fixing those glowing amber eyes on its target. Whenever the sound grew louder, a haze of dizziness followed, making it harder to focus, harder to think. It was worse at night. One evening, as the light outside dimmed, a soft click echoed from the front door. It wasn't the usual creak of the old hinges, it was the distinct sound, part of the knob turning. Heart pounding, a glance confirmed the impossible. The cat was on its hind legs, paw pressed against the door, mimicking human movements. Its head turned slowly, meeting the gaze with an almost knowing expression. The unease deepened. Objects weren't where they had been left. A cup from the sink appeared on the floor, shattered. A mirror in the hallway cracked overnight. In the reflection, for just a second, a shadow that wasn't there moved, a tall, elongated figure with glowing amber eyes. But when the head turned to check, nothing was behind. By now, the air in the apartment felt heavier, suffocating. The realization whispered louder with each passing day: this thing wasn't a cat. It wasn't anything natural. It was growing. And it was watching. The knock at the door startled the tense silence. Jamie stepped inside, the usual casual grin fading as their eyes locked onto the cat. It sat in the corner, motionless, its unblinking amber gaze fixed on the new arrival. "That thing creeps me out," Jamie muttered, shivering slightly. Your imagining things came the quick response, but even as the words left the lips, they felt hollow. As Jamie settled on the couch, the cat moved, but not like a cat. It stood, its movements too slow, too deliberate, and then dropped back to all fours. Jamie froze, their voice a sharp whisper. "Did you see that?" It walked, like it knew. Laughter filled the space, but it was forced. "You're paranoid," was the dismissive reply. But Jamie didn't laugh. Instead, they leaned in, their voice low. "You've heard of the growing shadow, right? It's an old legend, but people swear it's real. A creature that takes the shape of an animal, feeding off its host's fear and energy. They say it grows." Until their words trailed off, their eyes darting toward the cat, now perched on the windowsill. The cat tilted its head, its gaze locked on Jamie as though it understood every word. "You need to get rid of it," Jamie urged, their voice trembling. "That's ridiculous." But the seed of doubt had been planted. The visit ended abruptly. Jamie left with a final, uneasy glance at the cat. Alone again. The apartment felt colder, the shadows deeper. The cat returned to its spot, curling up as though nothing had happened. But as the lights dimmed, a low purr filled the space, this time accompanied by faint, distorted whispers. In the silence, a thought clawed its way forward. What if Jamie was right? The first scream was the sound of the mirror shattering. In the hallway, shards of glass glittered on the floor, reflecting the misshapen shadow of the cat as it prowled closer. Its body was no longer the sleek, compact form it had been. It was larger now, grotesquely stretched. The fur on its back thinned in uneven patches, revealing scaly, mottled skin. Beneath, its limbs were too long, its joints bending at angles that shouldn't have been possible. Claws scraped the walls as it moved, carving deep, jagged gouges into the plaster. The sound was a slow, deliberate screech, like a warning. The glowing amber eyes didn't blink, didn't waver, they simply watched. The purring was no longer a comforting hum. It had warped into something deeper, darker. Within the vibrations were distorted whispers, faint but unmistakable. The words slithered into the silence, taking on voices that shouldn't have been there. The name lingered, spoken in a familiar cadence, the voice of a mother long gone, then of Jamie, then of a stranger altogether. Panic clawed at reason. The apartment felt smaller, suffocating, as if the walls were closing in. Every attempt to escape was met with the cat, a monstrous sentinel, blocking every door, every path. Its sharp teeth glinted like shattered glass as it hissed. The sound wet and guttural. Sleep became impossible. Every moment spent near the creature drained energy like an unseen force feeding on life itself. Unexplained bruises appeared on arms, on legs, deep, purple marks in the shape of claws. Hallucinations grew worse, shadows twisting into unnatural shapes, the cat's form multiplying in mirrors. And yet, the whispers always returned. Late at night, when the air was still, the thing would perch on the bed, too large now to be ignored. It would lean in close, its breath cold, and whisper in its warped voice, "You can't run." The whispers wouldn't stop. They had moved from the cat to the walls now. A faint chorus of voices that grew louder in the dead of night. Each time sleep tried to come, the words rose, insistent and chilling. "It's almost time." Desperation replaced fear. The only option was to understand what this thing was, to make sense of the growing nightmare. Online forums, local legends, even obscure archives became an obsession. It was in a dusty corner of an urban folklore subreddit that the truth began to form. Stories of the growing shadow repeated themselves in unsettlingly similar ways. People taking in a stray with glowing eyes, the animal growing larger, feeding off their fear. Some entries described the creature's transformation in horrifying detail, while others simply stopped mid-sentence, the poster never returning to explain. The final clue was a chilling line that felt more like a warning: it doesn't just want to feed, it wants to take your place. Terror threatened to swallow reason, but a determination grew alongside it. Returning to old photos, trembling hands swiped through images of the cat. At first, it seemed normal, but then the distortion appeared. In one image, its body stretched unnaturally, almost like it was slipping through dimensions. In another, its glowing eyes stared straight into the camera, even though the photo was meant to capture the sunset. Worst was a reflection caught in the background, not a cat, but something tall, angular, and humanoid. By the time I turned from the screen, the cat was there, sitting just behind them. Larger. Now almost the size of a medium dog. Its face was different too, its mouth slightly open, revealing too many teeth. "Get out," I screamed, voice trembling. They threw open the door, trying to shove the creature out, but it didn't move. It only sat there, its gaze burning, its distorted purr growing louder, shaking the room. Then it stood, its body twisting unnaturally. Taller now, its head tilted with something that looked too much like amusement. Almost time it whispered. This time it wasn't the walls. It was the cat. The cat's purring stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so profound it felt alive. Then, slowly, a crackling sound filled the room, like bones snapping into place. I turned, heart hammering, to see the cat rising on its hind legs, its body stretching grotesquely upward. The creature was no longer trying to resemble a cat. It was huge now, towering, its limbs elongated and bending unnaturally. Thin patches of fur clung to its scaly skin, and its face was a warped mockery of feline features, amber eyes burning too brightly, a mouth filled with rows of jagged, glistening teeth. Its distorted, guttural voice filled the air. "You invited me in." I stumbled back, the words hitting like a physical blow. The room around them began to shift. The walls warped and bled shadows, the corners twisting into impossible angles. The floor buckled, gravity flickering like a dying light. The apartment was no longer a safe haven, it was its domain now. Desperation overrode fear. Grabbing the largest knife from the kitchen, I lunged, slashing at the creature. The blade glanced off its shadowy form, cutting through a patch of fur, but it only seemed amused. It swiped a clawed hand, narrowly missing eye ahead, leaving deep gouges in the wall. The amber eyes, they were too bright, too alive. Instinct took over. I lunged again, aiming for the glowing orbs. The blade connected, plunging deep into one of the eyes. The creature shrieked, a sound so inhuman it reverberated through the twisted apartment. Shadows recoiled violently, and for a moment, gravity returned. The wound hissed and smoked, but the creature didn't fall. Instead, it glared down, its remaining eye glowing brighter than ever. "You can't stop this," it hissed. The apartment trembled harder, cracks spreading across the floor as a dark, swirling void began to open beneath the creature's feet. The thing wasn't done yet, but neither was me. The void beneath the creature widened, black tendrils spiraling out like living smoke. The walls of the apartment peeled away, revealing nothing but endless darkness, punctuated by flickers of sickly green light. A low hum reverberated through the space, almost mechanical, almost alive. The creature staggered, its wounded eye oozing a strange, glowing liquid, but its presence didn't diminish. If anything, it grew stronger, towering higher as its shadow stretched across the warped floor. The tendrils pulsed, pulling at the air, and with a deafening crack, the rift opened fully. On the other side was a landscape that defied comprehension. Jagged, black spires reached into a churning sky, illuminated by twin, blood-red moons. The air shimmered, as if it were thick with heat, and shapes moved within the haze, creatures similar to the one standing before me. They were larger, more grotesque, their bodies constantly shifting as if struggling to maintain a form. Amber eyes dotted the darkness like fireflies, each one watching. A voice, low and guttural, reverberated through the air, not from the creature, but from the void itself. "This is the threshold. The creature turned to me, its twisted face forming what could only be described as a smile. You let me in, it hissed, its voice layered with dozens of tones. And now you will belong to us. Bussy. What? What are you? I whispered, trembling. I am a scout, it said, leaning closer. The first of many. You invited me, fed me. I grew. Because of you. And now it gestured to the rift, its clawed hand dripping with black fluid. You will choose. Join us or be consumed. The hum grew louder, the tendrils reaching closer. The amber eyes in the void blinked in. Unison, waiting. The air burned with the weight of the decision. The creature loomed closer, its distorted form nearly blotting out the swirling void behind. Its voice crawled through the air, resonating deep in my chest. Choose, mortal. You cannot fight what you invited. A trembling hand reached for the journal left open on the floor. The rushed research, the desperate scrawls of symbols and rituals from long-forgotten texts, were their only chance. One passage stood out, etched in frantic loops. The bond must be severed, with a piece of the self. The realization came with a pang of dread. It had to be something meaningful, something infused with me essence. Searching the room, their eyes landed on the old locket hanging by the bedside, a gift from their mother. The only thing they had left of for her. The thought of destroying it was a knife to the heart, but there was no time for hesitation. The void was growing, its tendrils creeping toward them. With trembling fingers, I grabbed the locket, its cool metal a cruel comfort. The creature tilted its head, as if sensing the plan. You think that will stop us? It hissed, laughter bubbling beneath its words. Ignoring the taunt, I struck a match, the flame flickering weakly in the unnatural air. Whispering the incantation from the journal, they pressed the match to the locket. Caught fire instantly, the metal glowing red hot before crumbling into ash. The heat seared palm, but they didn't let go until it was gone. The reaction was immediate. The creature screamed, its voice fracturing the air. The amber eyes dimmed, and the tendrils recoiled as the swirling void began to collapse. The apartment buckled, the walls snapping back into place as the rift sucked the creature into its depths. Before it disappeared, it managed one last whisper, barely audible but filled with malice. This is only the beginning. Then it was gone. The room was silent, the air heavy with the scent of ash and decay. Alex collapsed, clutching their burned hand, the weight of their loss pressing against their chest. They were safe for now, but the whispers would return. They always did. The silence was unbearable. For the first time in what felt like weeks, the apartment was still, but it didn't feel safe. Shadows clung to the corners like living things, darker than they should have been. I sat on the floor, staring at the scorch mark where the locket had burned, the faint scent of ash still lingering. The creature was gone, or so it seemed. The apartment had returned to its ordinary shape, but everything felt wrong. The walls seemed too close, the air too heavy. Every creak of the floorboards was like a whisper, and no matter where turned, it felt like eyes were on them. Days passed, but sleep never came. The dreams were worse. Shadows with glowing amber eyes flickered in the periphery of vision, fading just as focus sharpened. In the bathroom mirror, I swore their reflection smiled a second too late or blinked when they didn't. Bruises continued to bloom on their skin, claw-like marks etched into their arms, burning overnight. The thought of being alone became unbearable, so I did the unthinkable. A visit to the shelter brought home a new cat, a normal one, a small gray tabby with soft green eyes. It purred softly, curling into their lap, and for the first time in weeks I felt a sliver of peace. But that night, as sleep began to take hold, the whispers returned. Faint, just at the edge of hearing. You thought it was over. Bolting upright, I scanned the room. The tabby was gone, the shadows deeper. From the corner of the room, a pair of amber eyes blinked, followed by a low, familiar purr. Did you invite me in again? If you dare, share this story, but be careful. They say every retelling invites it closer. Are you sure that sound behind you is nothing? Or has something been watching all along? The scream wasn't human. It tore through the stillness of the woods, sharp and guttural, freezing the air in an instant. Spinning toward the sound, I stumbled, my flashlight trembling in my hands. There, just beyond the tree line, something moved, small, pale, air, and unnervingly silent. It was a cat, or at least it looked like one. Its white fur gleamed unnaturally in the faint moonlight, and its wide, glowing yellow eyes fixed on me without blinking. My heart pounded as I crouched, extending a hesitant hand. "Hey, it's okay," I whispered, my voice breaking. The cat tilted its head, the movement too slow, too deliberate. Then it stepped. Closer and closer still. That's when I saw it. Its legs were wrong. Elongated, jointed in unnatural ways, the skin stretching taut over. Visible bone. With every step, its body twitched like a marionette, pulled by invisible strings. I scrambled back, tripping over a root, my flashlight dropping to the ground. The beam flickered wildly, catching glimpses of its two wide mouths stretching open, revealing rows of jagged, needle-thin teeth. It let out a sound, half growl, half laughter, and darted forward faster than anything that size should move. And then it stopped, just inches away, watching, waiting. In the suffocating silence, I felt its gaze burn into me, unblinking, as if it were deciding. Deciding what? The cat didn't resist as I picked it up, its body limp yet unnervingly heavy. Its glowing eyes remained fixed on me, unblinking, even as I carried it out of the woods. My chest tightened as the quiet weight of the forest seemed to follow, a crushing silence that didn't lift until I stepped into my house. Setting the cat down, I noticed how pristine its white fur remained, untouched by the mud and leaves we'd trudged through. It didn't explore or stretch like I'd expected it, just sat in the corner, perfectly still, watching. I poured a bowl of water and set out some leftover chicken, but it didn't move. Hours passed. The food remained untouched. The cat didn't so much as blink. When night fell, I tried to sleep, but the sense of unease was unbearable. The silence felt alive, pressing against the walls. I finally drifted off, only to be plunged into a vivid, suffocating dream. I was back in the woods, the trees closer, their trunks twisting as though alive. Shadowy figures moved between them, too tall and too thin, their steps echoing unnaturally. The cat stood in the clearing, no longer small. It was impossibly large now, its glowing eyes the only source of light. The figures stopped moving and turned toward me. Their eyes, too, began to glow. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. My arms ached, and when I flipped on the light, I froze. Deep scratches ran from my wrists to my elbows, raw and burning, as if something had clawed at me while I slept. My breath caught as I turned to the corner of the room. The cat was sitting there, its head tilted slightly, its glowing eyes locked on mine. It hadn't moved all night. Or had it? The first change was almost imperceptible, a dullness in the cat's once pristine fur. By the third day, it had taken on a grimy, almost greasy texture, dark patches spreading like stains. Its movements, too, were no longer fluid. When it stretched, its limbs seemed to grow unnaturally long, bending at impossible angles for just a moment before snapping back into place. I tried to ignore it, brushing off the unease as exhaustion, but the cat's behavior grew stranger. One night, as I stood in the kitchen, I heard a soft click from the living room. When I turned, the cat was on its hind legs, paw pressed against the slightly ajar door. It stared at me, head tilted, as if waiting for me to say something. That was when the electronics began to malfunction. The TV would flicker on by itself, showing nothing but static. The lights buzzed and dimmed at random intervals. My phone rang in the dead of night, the screen showing no number. Every time I answered, there was only heavy breathing or worse, faint whispers in a language I couldn't understand. Shadows started to move on their own. In the corner of my eye, they would ripple, stretching unnaturally across the walls and ceiling, their edges sharp and jagged like broken glass. Whenever I turned to face them, they were gone, but the cat was always there, watching me from a new spot. I decided I couldn't keep it any longer. I grabbed the cat, threw open the door, and left it. Outside, slamming the door shut behind me. Relief was short-lived. When I turned around, it was already inside, sitting on the couch, licking its paw like nothing had happened. My chest tightened as I backed away. The door was still locked. The cat stopped licking and looked up at me, its eyes glowing brighter than before. The lights flickered, and for the first time I heard it purr low and distorted like static mixed with laughter. The unease was unbearable. I needed answers. With trembling hands, I searched online, piecing together fragments of local legends and strange forums. The stories were eerily similar, people drawn to the woods by something unusual, an animal or a sound. Each tale ended the same: they vanished. The ones who returned were wrong. One thread stopped me cold, it followed me home, but it wasn't a cat anymore. Its eyes. They weren't its eyes. A photo accompanied the post, a blurry image of glowing yellow eyes deep in the woods. The pounding at my door broke my focus. It was my neighbor, an old man who rarely spoke but now stood pale and shaking on my porch. "You brought it back, didn't you?" he rasped, his voice trembling. "What do you mean?" My words felt small, hollow. "That's not your cat. It's the forest's now." His eyes darted behind me, scanning the house. "You need to take it back before it decides to stay." I demanded answers, but he shook his head, stepping away. "Don't trust its eyes. It's not what it seems." And if you hear the trees whisper, he didn't finish the sentence, retreating with a haunted look. That night, the dreams returned, sharper and more vivid than ever. I was in the woods again, but the trees were wrong, twisting and pulsing like veins. The ground oozed dark liquid, and shadowy figures moved between the trunks, whispering my name. Cat appeared, larger now, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. I woke up gasping, the air in my room stifling. The cat sat at the edge of the bed, staring at me with those same glowing eyes. Behind it, the shadows in the room shifted unnaturally, stretching toward me. My breath caught as a faint whisper filled the air. "Come back." It started with the shadows. They stretched and shifted on the walls, moving even when no light touched them. Then came the sound, a low, wet scratching that echoed from every corner of the house. The cat, silent until now, rose from its spot in the corner, its body unnervingly still as it turned to face me. I froze. Its fur was no longer white but streaked with oily black, patches peeling away to reveal writhing tendrils underneath. As it stepped closer, its limbs stretched unnaturally, long, bending and twisting as if pulled by unseen strings. Its glowing yellow eyes, brighter than ever, locked onto mine. "You brought me back," it said, its voice layered with something ancient and alien. "Now, you must return." The words sent a jolt of icy fear through me, and I stumbled back, colliding with the wall. The air shifted, thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. The walls began to warp, the plaster cracking as thick, gnarled branches pushed through. Moss spread like a living thing, coating every surface, and the ceiling dripped with dark liquid that smelled of decay. The shadows moved, detaching from the walls. Figures emerged, tall, thin, and wrong, their shapes flickering like broken images in a film. Each one had glowing eyes, identical to the cat's. They whispered as they surrounded me, their voices overlapping in a chaotic hum. I couldn't make out the words, but they filled my head, drowning out every thought. In the center of the room, a swirling void appeared, black and alive, pulling at the air. The figures and the cat began to drag me toward it, their cold, claw-like hands gripping my arms and legs. The forest was on the other side, but it was no forest, it was a living, breathing nightmare. The trees pulsed like organs, their roots slithering like snakes. "You cannot escape," the cat hissed, its mouth splitting unnaturally wide. "You belong to us now." I fought, kicking and screaming, but their grip was unyielding. The pull of the void grew stronger, and the last thing I saw before everything went black was the cat's face, its eyes glowing brighter than the void itself. Then, I was gone. The air was thick, suffocating, as the shadows tightened their grip on my arms. Thrashed wildly, my feet scraping against the gnarled roots that now covered the floor. The cat, or what was left of it, loomed above me, its face splitting wider to reveal rows of jagged teeth. "You took me," it hissed, its voice layered and alien. "Now you will stay." The figures surrounded me, their glowing eyes burning like fire in the dark. In them, I saw flashes of faces distorted, screaming, their mouths stretched in silent agony. Their bodies flickered, half-formed, like they were trapped between two worlds. One of them stepped closer, a hand clawing at its own chest as it whispered, "Leave before it's too late." Panic gripped me as I flailed, my hand brushing against something solid in my pocket. The lighter. My heart pounded. Fire. I didn't know if it would work, but it was all I had. With trembling fingers, I flicked the wheel, the small flame barely visible against the crushing darkness. The cat recoiled, its glowing eyes narrowing into slits. I grabbed a branch from the floor, its bark slick and alive, and thrust it into the flame. It caught, instantly the fire roaring to life with an unnatural intensity. The shadows screamed, a deafening cacophony that rattled my skull. The figures dissolved into smoke, their glowing eyes fading into the void. The cat shrieked, its elongated body writhing as the fire consumed it. The portal behind it began to collapse, the trees twisting and folding into themselves as the ground quaked beneath me. I ran, the burning branch lighting my way as the world disintegrated around me. A force yanked me backward, and for a moment I thought I was lost, but then everything went still. Tori still. I woke up on the forest floor, the lighter clutched in my hand. The cat was gone. The forest was quiet, almost peaceful, but I knew better. The whispers lingered, faint and distant. We are always watching. And somewhere deeper in the woods, I swore I saw a pair of glowing yellow eyes. The house was silent when I woke. The first rays of sunlight cut through the windows, chasing away the suffocating darkness of the night before. My body ached, my hands blistered from gripping the burning branch, but I was alive. The cat was gone, the hollow shadows still. I told myself it was over, that whatever nightmare I had stumbled into had burned away with the portal. Yet, as I moved through the house, the sense of wrongness lingered. The walls seemed to close in around me, and the corners of the rooms felt darker than they should have been. Every creak of the floorboards sent a jolt through my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. That night, the dreams returned. The forest loomed larger, its trees more twisted, their roots slithering like worms. The shadows were waiting, their glowing eyes fixed on me. But in the dream, I wasn't running. I was walking toward them, willingly. When I woke, my breath caught in my throat. Scratches lined the walls of my bedroom, deep gouges like claw marks. My reflection in the mirror flickered just for a second, but long enough for me to see a pair of yellow eyes staring back. The days passed, but the forest never let me go. Its whispers grew louder, calling to me when I was alone. Then, one evening, as I stood at the window, I heard it, a soft, familiar meow. My heart froze. At the edge of the tree line, another cat sat watching, its white fur gleaming in the moonlight. Its glowing yellow eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. I didn't move. I couldn't. If you see a stray animal in the woods, don't take it home. You might not leave with just a cat. Are you sure that noise outside is just the wind? Or is something waiting for you to invite it in?